All right, so this is Robert Jackson working with Epoch Games, and I'm going to put together a little tutorial here to show you what my work process is like for creating characters, adding accessories like clothing and hair to them, and exporting them from Character Creator so they can be imported into Unreal Engine and configured to work with ALS. So, this is the female-based character that I have been working on. I'm sure it needs a lot of work. This tutorial is not for showing you how to create a character in Character Creator. For one reason is because when I click my morph targets options, you can see as I go through my options that I still have a lot of these purple options here that when I add value to them in the sliders, it tells me that these objects are watermarked because I don't own them, because I need to update my version of Character Creator. So for now, we're going to skip over this. We're going to get back to this part a little bit later. I'm going to show you what the process is like to import and attach clothing. And I will show you a few different ways to go about doing that, just in case anybody wants to try a few different ways of experimenting. So, first things first, I'm going to switch over to 3ds Max, which is my 3D application for manipulating 3D objects. And you can see I have the underwear model that I have imported from Epoch Games. As it was given to me, it comes in one piece. The top and bottom are one piece. So what I'm going to do is separate these two pieces first. And I will try to explain what I'm doing as I'm going through this so it all makes sense. As I'm going through right now, what I'm doing is I'm adding smoothing to make sure the objects are smooth when they get imported into Character Creator. Looking for my smoothing groups. They are hiding from me somewhere. There they are. So you can see it gets rid of the faceted look and the rough edges. The second thing that we're going to do, once these two things are separated, is we're going to name them individually. Once we do that, what I always do when I am importing new models is I take a look at it and I just make sure everything looks like it's in order for the most part, as symmetrical as it can be. No polygons or edges that look like they don't need to be or need to be clipped. Anything that obviously stands out and needs a little bit of work, I'll do it at this point. But as these stand, I'm not going to do anything to them. They look okay. One thing I do always check at this point is the pivot points. It's at this point you want to make sure your pivots are in the right places for the objects that you're going to import into Character Creator. So I center the pivot, and if I want it to be a little less than center, like if I want to make it a little bit higher or so, I can go in here and manually select where I want the pivot point of this object to be. Once we have that in place, you want to make sure every object that you export to be imported into Character Creator gets zeroed out in its world space coordinates in 3ds Max or whatever 3D program that you're using. In this case, it's really easy. Once the object's selected, I can right-click on its X, Y, and Z coordinates, and it snaps it to the center of the grid. This is important. Don't skip this step. Whether we're talking about importing things directly from 3ds Max into Unreal Engine or from 3ds Max into Character Creator, this is the step that aligns the pivot point of all of the objects individually. You want to make sure that your pivot point is set on the object first, and then the object's general pivot is set to the center of the grid before you export. Once it is, export selected. All of the objects that you're going to export from 3ds Max to be used in Unreal Engine or Character Creator should be exported in FBX format. I usually leave everything pretty much default, unless I am doing something where I'm exporting animation at this stage, but for this we are not. So we are just going to hit OK and export this as an FBX model. We're just going to move it out of the way so that we can zero out the location of the other piece and export it as well. And I am going to copy the name and use my hotkeys for exporting. Now, once those are exported, you can take a look at them individually. So I'm going to reset my 3ds Max view here. And then I'm going to open one of those models just to take a look and just to make sure everything looks like it's centered and okay. So I'm going to go back to where I saved them. And I can see when I come back to 3ds Max that it's the only object in here and it's named correctly and it's centered correctly and it's ready to go. So next thing we're going to do is switch back to Character Creator. To import either of those two pieces of clothing into Character Creator, what we do is go to Create, Accessory, and find the model that we just created. I would recommend only importing one object at a time. And since we were not comparing frames of reference between 3ds Max and Character Creator on the last step, it comes into Character Creator at a very large size, but that's no problem. We can just uniformly scale that down to size. Now, it very often won't import perfectly sized, and it's going to require a little bit of extra work to get it to fit whatever body it is that you're adding this piece of clothing to. And I'm going to show you several different ways to go about making sure it fits the body as closely and snugly and correctly as at least I know how to get it. For now, we're going to move past this and we're going to import the other piece of clothing also. Okay, so as you can see, that is a pretty close fit. It could use some work though. You can see that there is gaps between where the arms are, and a little bit of extra space along the back. And you can see there's a lot of clipping where it doesn't quite fit the shape of the body. First thing we want to make sure, and I can't emphasize this enough, make sure that your character is in the T pose while you are fitting the clothing. Absolutely make sure they're in the T pose before you attach the clothing. That will save you a lot of heartache and a lot of clipping issues as we go forward. Now, if you want to make this a slightly better fit within this program and not have to go elsewhere to a third-party program, what you can do before you attach the clothing to the skin is you can go to Edit Mesh. Make sure the piece of clothing is selected that you want to edit, and then select Edit Mesh from the first tab in the Modify tab. If your setting is set up for default CC3 user interface settings, it's over here on the right hand side. Go to Edit Mesh, and now you can manipulate the vertices, the faces, the elements individually. I would recommend sticking to vertices in this program because it does not seem to select and track elements in face level very well or very accurately. You're also going to probably want to uncheck Ignore Back Faces, which is checked by default, and probably check Soft Selection because that'll help you get a smoother selection as we go. So with that, those two things checked, Ignore Back Faces off, Soft Selection on, and you can adjust the radius as you see fit. What you can now come in here and do is grab a small piece of what you want to edit. So let's say something like that for this example anyway. Let's bring the radius down. Actually, it's covering a lot of ground. We don't want to move that much at once. I think it's biased down a little too. At which point we can make a manual adjustment to how closely the clothing fits. It isn't perfect. It will take quite a bit of time to do it this way. And this is fine for a simple model like this bra. But if you're going to do something more complex that needs a little bit more fine tuning, I would absolutely recommend making those edits in a third-party program like Maya or Studio Max. I will show you as we go the Studio Max process that I go through to do that as well. And I will let you guys choose for yourself what works best for you. But I am showing you what tends to work best for me. So, you get the idea. We won't go through and fine tune all of this because I'll show you a better way to get it to fit in a few minutes. Okay, take a bit of a closer look at the bottom now. Alright, so you get the general idea. That is the process to go about refitting and resizing clothing that you import from other programs onto your characters in Character Creator. But you're not done. As it stands right now, when you import a piece of clothing, it imports it as an accessory. Now, when I create my accessories and my characters, I create a library and I keep a very long list of everything that I have imported, so I don't have to go through this process over and over again. In order to create your custom library, you have to use these custom tags or tabs as opposed to the template tab underneath the content. So hair goes underneath the hair icon. This is skin and makeup and all of the things that you probably imported from the marketplace. Clothing, I have a lot of things that I have imported from the marketplace or created custom from other programs. And accessories. Accessories are treated different than clothing in that they can be layered over clothing. Clothing takes up specific slots on the body of a character. For example, you can only have one shirt on a character. You can have one shirt on a character. You can have one pair of pants on a character. If you try to assign a second pair of pants to a character, it simply replaces the first pair. But as far as accessories go, they can be layered over clothing, which is useful if that's what you're shooting for. And you can designate anything that you import as clothing or accessories, and I'll show you how in the next step. So right now, we want to add these two pieces of clothing that we imported as clothing. So I have an underwear section under my custom tag for my clothing tab for all of my content. Under women's underwear, which is a custom category that I created, what I want to do is click this plus button to add it as underwear. But you can see right now that this plus button is grayed out. That is because this piece of underwear that is selected is not seen by Character Creator as underwear until you transfer its skin weights to the piece of the body that you want it to be associated with. Until you do that, it is considered an accessory. And you can tell that for sure when you go to the Accessories tab in your Custom tab, where you would save whatever it is that you want to save. And you can see that this plus button is now lit up. That means it sees it as an accessory. So we wanted to see it as underwear. What we're going to do is say transfer skin weights over here on the right side. And we're going to choose what we want to add it as. Underwear, things that fit snugly to the body, generally go under default. You may have to do some experimenting with these categories to figure out what works best for any particular piece of clothing, but for the most part, it's self-explanatory. Stick with defaults if you can't figure out what to do, and go from there. So you hit apply. I do believe it's done. I'm not sure it did that, so let's try one more time. Oh, the option is gone, so perhaps it did. So let's go to Scene, grab the top, and make sure we transfer its skin weights as well. Default, apply. Okay. So now we're going to go back to Content, and we can see that the plus is lit up. I save every individual piece with the cleanest thumbnail that I can to make it as easy as possible to go through all of these options, because it gets to be a lot of options. In order to save each individual thumbnail, what you have to do is hide the parts that you don't intend to show for the thumbnail. and select the part that you do want to add to your content library. In this case, it's the bra, so we've hidden everything else. And we zoom in on it good tight. Hit the plus button, and it'll ask you for a name. That's good. And if you don't like the thumbnail, you can rotate the object around on the screen, right-click on the thumbnail, and say recapture thumbnail. And it'll give you a nice clean update. And you go back to scene and turn the other things back on. Well, we should hide the body, hide the top, select the bottom, come back over here, zoom in so that it's centered, go back to content, and hit plus again. And just save it. That will save you a lot of redundant work. If you keep a library in your character creator of the characters that you're creating as well as the accessories that you're using, it's really easy and really fast to mix and match and add those pieces of clothing back to your characters after the fact. Now that they are on there, I'll show you a few things you probably have figured out, but you might not know already. For starters, if you decide that you want to sculpt your character still, you will notice that as you increase the size of your character, the size of the clothing also adjusts with the character. That will save you a lot of time rigging and attaching clothing as you go forward. You might not be sure where you want things to be when you attach the piece of clothing, but you have a lot of latitude in changing things after the fact. So do keep that in mind. Also, at this point, as soon as they're attached, you should be able to test and make sure that they are attached by changing the pose and make sure that the pose doesn't stretch the clothing in a way that is unexpected. You will know that it is, particularly if you did not have your character in the T pose before you attached, say, the top to the character, because it will attach the polygons of this bra, the top part of the bra, to the under part of the arm if the arm was too close during the attach process. That is why it's critical that it stays in the T pose until the clothing is attached. If you don't see that stretching problem, then you probably avoided a lot of the transferring skin weights problem, and you'll be able to tell right away at this point. So far, this looks like it's attached well enough to stay attached and stay in place with the character. It's not perfect as it is, but it's functional as it is. So we will put her back in a pose that is useful for the moment. We're back in the T pose. I have a ton of hairstyles in my library. Now, every time CC3 makes an update, they change my library, and it's all nested under a big long list that I wish it weren't, but everything is still here. I do believe the one that I gave her last time was this one. And of course, that one is very light colored blonde, and the color that I had on her before was a very dark colored hair. So in order to change the hair color, what I do is select the hair, come to the right side to the Modify tab, select this, the material, the checkerboard tab, and you'll notice that there are several different elements to the hair. In fact, there are several different elements to a lot of accessories that you're going to want to make changes to here, and you do need to be mindful of which one of the elements you are selecting when you are trying to make changes. In this case, it's the hair. At least I believe it's the hair, so we'll see in a moment. Oops, not that. We want to right click and say adjust color. And you can either come in here and adjust the brightness, pull down the brightness, and you get quite a range and color adjustment from here. You can also bring it up and affect the hue if you so choose. And the saturation, naturally. We're just going to pull the brightness down for now. You also have this option here for what different shader type you want to use. I don't know which one you ultimately will want to use for Unreal Engine and following through, so there's probably going to need to be some experimenting done. By default, a lot of the ones that come from CC3 are digital human hair. Some of them default to PBR as well. In addition to right-clicking on the base color and adjusting the color, you also have the ability to come down here and change the texture maps out, play with the parameters. There's tons of stuff here, so I'm not going to go through all of these settings individually. That's a lot for some artists to play with, but you know where all of the tools are to get you started. And at this point, all of these things are attached to the character. And let's see. Well, let's see. I don't want to go through that. Most of the motion controls, as far as the animation are concerned, are a function of iClone, not necessarily character creator. So we will just stick with the poses for now to test a few things out. What we're testing at the moment is to make sure the hair also attached correctly, and it did. And you can usually rest assured that it's going to every time when you attach it and add it from here, but it's always good to check. Now, I'm going to show you one more way to go about adjusting the clothing for the characters before we go through the import process for Unreal Engine. What I'm going to do is put this character back into the T-pose. I am going to take the clothing and hair off and delete them. So it's just the body base model that we're exporting. We're going to go to export, FBX. You can say clothed character, but it doesn't matter if there's nothing on there. It's just going to export the body. I use 3ds Max, so I'm switching my target to 3ds Max. I don't know what difference this makes at all. That's up to you guys to play with that one a little bit more. Export. Okay, once that is exported, it will create 3 files. This FBX key is necessary for re-importing your character into Character Creator if you should choose to do that, if you want to go back and edit it later. I never do that because I save all of my characters before I export them, and if I ever need to come back to Character Creator to make changes to my base character, I just come back to Character Creator and make those changes to the base character and export again, as opposed to importing it into the program again, because that just creates all kinds of headache that it's easier to just avoid. But as it were, we're going to go back to Studio Max and hit reset. And we're going to open the FBX file for the character we just exported. She comes in really small, so we're going to scale her up. We're not worried about the world scale, we're just worried about the relative scale between the model and the clothing that we're going to put on the model. Okay, so you'll notice when you import this into Studio Max that it's got all of these wires everywhere, because those are the bones in the skeletal system. So what we're going to do is come in here and first hide the geometry and select the bones. Actually, before we do that, I'll show you why this is a good thing for fitting clothing. Unless we broke something.